Well, thank you very much for joining us today on Louder Than Green. We've got a very exciting guest today. And if you're building anything sustainable, regenerative, or just smarter than the status quo, then you're in the right place. If you're just tuning in, we are Green That Dream. And we don't just help businesses go green, we help them flourish without the fluff. That means smarter systems, cleaner growth, and strategies that help move the needle for people, planet, and profit. So if you're ready to take your business to the next level, stick around. And if you want a free growth consultation, head to greenthatdream.com or just DM us the word growth. Alrighty, let's get into it. So today on Louder Than Green, we are joined by Brando Crespi. He is a true pioneer at the intersection of ecology, innovation, and business. Brando is an ecopreneur and deep ecologist with more than 4 decades of experience spanning environmental strategy, regenerative development, and climate smart innovation. He has co-founded award-winning NGOs like Pro Natura International, consulted for global brands like Armani and Procter & Gamble, and led the charge on climate technologies like biochar, biodegradable plastics, and carbon negative materials through companies like Global Biocarbons and Polymateria. Born in Switzerland, raised in Rome, and educated at Georgetown, Brando's journey has taken him from the Amazon rainforest to the Vatican, from launching luxury brands in LA to shaping post-carbon climate solutions. Today in our conversation, we're going to be looking at real-world business and operational challenges of scaling environmental impact, as well as looking at how ancient knowledge and modern tech are converging in today's climate economy, and why regenerative innovation needs both science and soul. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a consultant, or someone rethinking their impact, this episode is a master class in systems thinking, legacy building, and brave regeneration. Thank you very much for joining me today, Brando. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Love
Thank
your
you.
work and love what you're aiming at, which is to bring wisdom and information to more and more people.
Absolutely. Thank you for being a part of that. So you have one of the most eclectic and impactful journeys in the environmental space. How would you describe the thread that connects it all?
Not what they teach you in business school, but what kind of marked my life was a near-death experience I had at 12. And I nearly drowned off the coast of Western Sardinia and had what later I discovered was a very classical experience. My whole life flashed in front of me and so on. But
Wow.
it left me with what I call the nostalgia for the divine and that experience, which many have had because of exploration in spiritual techniques or psychedelia, that feeling of being a drop of water emerging into the ocean. And that left a very subtle but profound imprint, which essentially nurtured a side of me which was essentially to be a cognitive dissident, if you want. Realize that the reality that we all share, more or less, was just a pale reflection of something else. So I don't want to get too spiritual or but it did mark my life, and in a way was at the root of a whole process which eventually led me to abandon and partly to be dismissed by my class. People don't speak today in terms of class too much, but anyway.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think soul takes a big part of soul and spirit takes a big part of of really any business and life. I appreciate you sharing that because I do feel that sometimes we leave too much of the soul out of the business. And I think that it's important to have that like connection to spirit, whatever makes you tick, right? And whatever keeps you grounded. So that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
I mean, one's life, the moment you're not the center of your life anymore,
Yeah.
things get a lot easier and
Yeah.
with less drama.
Yes.
So
I've
ego
noticed
has a
that
very
too.
useful function, but can also can interfere with purpose.
Right, absolutely. So tell me about some of your current work. What exactly are you building with the global biocarbon biocarbons, and what role does biochar play in solving the climate crisis?
Yeah, sure. So just to put this into some kind of context, 80, I have a Brazilian, I'm an Italian from all practical points of view.
Yes.
I was brought up in Italy. I have an Italian passport. I certainly feel very Italian in areas of aesthetics and of culinary issues. I also have a Brazilian passport, and I was born with one because my father and family had a whole Brazilian side. So in '85, a friend of mine called Marcelo Andrade, a very wonderful and unique human being, very charismatic character, we were asked to open WWF in Brazil. We couldn't do that for political reasons. There was a military government, and we didn't want what they saw as an American environmental organization. So we created an NGO called Pro Natura, and in '92, after the Rio conference and the big conference on biodiversity, which the US, by the way, never signed that treaty. We decided to internationalize our operations because we had decided, in the folly of youth, to try and address the problems of one of the 7 most degraded areas of the Amazon. And at the time, the flavor of the month was of the time, better yet, was called conservation. So the idea was you create these oases, and you protect them. And but our little oasis was larger than the UK. It was like 13 million hectares. You can really put fences around it and stop people from cutting trees, right? You have to find a different solution. And our solution, based also on just basically strategic and systemic thinking, and on the fact that I have a long lasting passion for anthropology, was to work with the local populations and turn and help those who were the problem, in this case, migrant farmers who slash and burn, into those who became a solution. And, it's easy to put it as simple as that. It's much more complicated to do it in the real world. But we did it. And today, that project, which is in an area of the Amazon called Juruena on the border of Mato Grosso, is considered by the World Bank for one of the best development projects in South America. So after '92, we discovered that, we thought maybe we can internationalize what we're doing. And I was already living in Paris at the time, and together with an extraordinary man called Guy Renaud, who was my mentor and partner, we opened an office and started working in Africa and Asia. Sorry, this is a long prelude
It's
to
okay.
biochar, but
Yeah.
it may make some sense at the end. So we started working on developmental areas, and applied a lot of the lessons that we had learned in the Amazon to countries like Nigeria and Mali and Burkina and Vietnam and so on. And eventually became well known for something called sustainability, which at that time wasn't really a very common word, right? And we won the Mitchell Prize, which was called the Nobel Prize of Sustainability for our work. So that was all very nice. And eventually it led us to deploy $1.6 billion and get at least 7 million people out of abject poverty. And also, we got to have a lot of fun organizing the largest expeditions in the world to study biodiversity and to develop all our flying devices to go and explore the canopies of rainforest. So that's a whole other story. Coming back to biochar, although I had been quite a bit in the Amazon, I had no idea what biochar was, nor what terra preta was. And I'll explain a little more why the Amazon is important in this case. But what happened is essentially we started working in Africa. We realized that the situation of the state of African forests is much, much worse even today than the state of the Amazon. About 50% of African forests are being cut down, and about 18% of the Amazon has been cut down. So you can just that. And that the main culprit in Africa was charcoal. It was a charcoal business because people cook and heat on charcoal. So charcoal is a $20 billion informal industry. It's the second largest in Africa. And it's responsible for 70% of the deforestation. And it's also thus of loss of biodiversity and the arrival of diseases like Ebola and so on, because most of those viruses live on treetops, on the canopy. And worse, it's responsible for the death of about 600,000 women and children per year who breathe the fumes of charcoal, what are called VOCs, for the volatile organic compounds. So we said, okay, this seems like a very interesting problem to solve. And we decided to create a green charcoal. Put our hands in our pockets and open up a little plant in northern Senegal. Hired a brilliant Algerian engineer and built a machine that could take rice husks and treat them through a system, technology called pyrolysis, which essentially heats biomass and in an oxygen-free environment. What came out was this black powder, which we then compressed and is an alternative to charcoal because it is, first of all, it's sustainably created from waste. Now, you don't have to cut trees to do this.
Yeah.
And it is 40% cheaper than traditional charcoal. It burns twice as hot, lasts twice as long, and so on. I have a company today in Nigeria with some partners and friends doing it, and we did this in Senegal, and we're doing this in a number of other places. But so this technology won the Altrin Prize for Best Technology for the Developing World. And at that point, I got a call from some professor from Cornell called Johannes Lehmann, no idea who he was, who said, by the way, congratulations on your prize. Do you know you have the best biochar technology in the world? And that was true then, not today. And this is 1998, 99, turn of the century. And I said, thank you, Johannes. What's biochar? And that question changed my life.
I love that. I love
Yeah. So he explained what biochar was, but he was kind of surprised because he knew that we had spent time in the Amazon. Amazonian Indians had been using what today we call biochar for thousands of years. I mean, there's a lot of discussion. 8,000 years. What essentially they had learned from observation is that areas where the charcoal was available after fires, that area became very, very fertile. And this was really out of observation. But so what they started doing is grinding charcoal, mixing it with household waste. And today we actually can see what they did because there is a very rich black earth called Terra Preta dos Índios, Indian black earth, which is sold on Transamazonica in sacks. And I never really connected the two. And technique, if you want, ancestral wisdom allowed for the creation of cities in the Amazon. And much to our surprise, because we had, I mean, until a few years ago, we had an image of isolated tribes living, small groups, maybe a few families. Well, we now know that there were cities of 50,000 people on the banks of rivers, which were certainly cleaner and as large as London was in the 14th century. And the reason these cities could be created is that using this technique, you could grow enough food to feed an urban population. That's the origin, if you want, biochar, now we know that a number of cultures around the world discovered the same thing. So when Johannes said, who by the way is the great brilliant scientist behind the study of biochar, when Johannes basically explained this to us, he said, look, you're in northern Senegal. Why don't you just give some of that powder before you compress it and sell it as charcoal to neighboring farmers? And Aziz, who was living next door and was growing rice and maize and onions, said, "Sure, I'll try it. Why not?" And came back to us and say, "Look, I've doubled rice production. I've tripled maize. My carrots are 40%, 60% bigger." And we went, "Whoa, that's wonderful." And then from there, we started deploying it in Mali and Burkina and in some of the poorest places on this planet, right on the southern border of the Sahara Desert. It's called the Sahel. And so we mixed biochar and camel dung and a few other tricks because the French had a long history of agronomy in Africa. We're able, starting with sterile sand, to create 11 harvests a year of vegetables. And I was really impressed at that point. From there, we moved this back to South America, to Asia, and so on. And so that's how it all started.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's quite a journey.
Yeah, it is,
So,
and a journey which progressed in ways which were very meaningful to communities and to
sure.
cooperatives, but which ultimately were just like a small, beautiful example of what could happen. And we realized that if to scale all of this, we were in the wrong business. You could not scale a innovation of this size,
Yeah.
of this importance through an NGO. You had to figure out a way to make it into a business. That's been our challenge, and not only our challenge, because farmers are very conservative. It's very difficult to get farmers to change the way they grow things. Even when, we constantly have to create feedback loops with farmers because otherwise they go back, even if they end up producing less, they go back to their own old ways. And this is true throughout the whole international, worldwide. All of a sudden, these large financial institutions started calling me up before that, saying, "Are you going to be there? Can we meet?" And so on. And I was going, "That's odd. It's only me calling them." And they saying, "Don't call me. I'll call you back." And essentially, the financial community had discovered that there was something called the carbon market, carbon credits, and all of that, which had been going on for a while, that biochar was becoming the most popular form of carbon credit, if you want. And today, the section which is called CDRs, carbon dioxide removal, which is the best section of the carbon market, about 83% of it is based on biochar. So at that point, a lot of people got into the biochar business thinking, well, I can use these credits to fund my project or to make money on this. That was, however, for a number of reasons we don't need to go into here. I never thought, I'm not alone in this, that was the best, that was a good way to go at it. To create a business, a sustainable business, it has to be profitable, independently of grants or carbon credits and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't sustain it on the carbon credits.
Yeah. And a lot of people who based their business on credits have gone bankrupt. There are a number of Today, you can buy biochar which is sitting around because they weren't able to market it,
Yeah.
and they went belly up. So there's still 2 or 3 years where there's going to be some excess production of biochar. The other problem is that biochar is a relatively small business, about $600 million a year worldwide, and with intrinsic problems like the conservatism of farmers. But, when you stop looking at the tree and start looking at the forest, then you realize that, well, actually, agriculture is only one aspect of what we're talking about. And we all know biochar under a different name as activated charcoal in our water filters. That's biochar. And that is in itself a very big business. I don't remember what the numbers are. And certainly more profitable than just selling biochar to farmers. But then we realized, stepping back and looking at this, let's say holistically, we realized that the pathway for us was not to compete in the biochar business, but which has its own intrinsic problems beyond what I just described, quality issues and so on, but was really to address a global problem caused by a widely used commodity called carbon black. And carbon black, most people have never heard of carbon black, but if they look around themselves, the moment they see anything dark, including the income paper or the tires of cars or black plastic or, dyes on clothes or, that's carbon black. That is a $27 billion business. And we decided that it would be interesting to see how we can compete in that place because that carbon black is the result of essentially fossil fuels being burned. So it's what's left over. It's the soot. Technically, it's soot. And it is incredibly bad for us because we breathe it. And industrial areas or areas near highways and so on, you will have lung problems. And it's bad for us as a planet because that black soot is now covering mountain ice and glaciers and so on, absorbing sun, increasing the rate at which snow is melting, and so on. So we can see a really clear pathway to decarbonize large industries like plastics, cement, asphalt, and by substituting the carbon black element with a biocarbon, which solves a lot of problems because carbon black is imported from China and India and Russia. So you can imagine the problems there. Secondly, it's fossil based. So it is part of the problem. It's not in any way a solution to that problem. And lastly, by substituting, say 30% of the mix of the compounds that goes into dark plastics with a bio-based solution, you decrease at least by that number the amount of nanoplastics, microplastics. So there's all kinds of advantages. The main one is that essentially we can decarbonize large industries. And these are industries that don't necessarily want to change. They like just making money the way they always made money. But because of legislation, especially European taxes on carbon, called CBAM, and because of market demand from people like you and I who want our companies to give us cleaner, better, healthier, for us and for our planet products, every company now is looking at how can they decarbonize? And legislation obliges them to take responsibility all the way down to scope 3, which means the suppliers of their suppliers. So it's a very positive time to bring this kind of solution to market because there's a convergence of positive factors leading to the acceptance of this.
So, I mean, like you've beautifully gone through these questions without me even asking, I have to say. But like talking about how that biocarbon can fit into sectors like construction and consumer products and agriculture, like you're saying, what type of infrastructure would need to be built in order to bring in biocarbon to replace all those uses? Like you're talking about the black carbon, like that's a multi-billion industry. How does that get replaced? Is it possible?
Oh, yes. Not only is it possible, but I think we have the best solution in the world. Allow
Yeah.
me a little hubris about that, because we just made a deal with a company that has developed the best biochar and the best carbon black biocarbons in the world. But so let's talk about biochar. Go back to biochar. Biochar is made through the ethical use of biomass, and what that means is sawdust or chips or something which is not cut on purpose to make this. You don't want to do a forest and then transform that into
Right.
biochar, but you can take so you can actually do more than that. You can create syngas, so you can create energy. But the main purpose of this pyrolysis technology is to create this carbon product. Now, there are plenty of companies producing pyrolysis. So Chinese have probably the best known for it because they have biochar is now part of the state with 5-year plans. Every university works with an industrial company in China to develop biochar, pyrolysis, and so on. And I've used Chinese technology. I think we can do better. We have better. But point of this is that you have to start with ethically sourced biomass wood products. So it could be agricultural waste like rice husk, can be even bamboos or knaf in some areas. But what we're discovering is, and we all know this, is that there are more and more forests catching fires, and there are more and more forests that need to be cleared of what's left after the fires. Here in Santa Fe, near Santa Fe, we had this Hermit Peak fire, and there's 62 million charred trunks of trees that need to be brought out of that forest. And you have 5 to 7 years before it degrades and all becomes greenhouse gas. So you want to use that period of time to go into the forest, and the forestry service and FEMA, I don't know today, but used to fund people to clear the forest and so it can be reforested. And that is our raw material. Okay? Pyrolysis is a general name for a lot of different technology. The technology we use produces a supercharge, which is over 90%, 93 to 95% carbon, high carbon content. There are plenty of biochars, like from rice husk, which have a 50% carbon content. Good biochar is considered to have 80 plus carbon content. And
Okay.
the quality of this char that we produce is such that it's essentially a multi-layered graphene. So what we're looking at is working with the plastics industry, but also developing products for batteries and for
Mhm.
um, nanotubes, other kind of exotic, high tech products that we can create without having to rely on Chinese graphene.
Yeah.
So the moment, and at the same time, our biochar is the only biochar approved by the FDA. It can be used in cleaning up a lot of the messes from mining and from other problems because it will absorb a lot of the toxic chemicals in those
Right.
sites.
Absolutely. Yeah. What have you learned about building and working with regenerative companies that traditional business thinkers often don't understand or they miss, they're not aware of? What's your experience with that?
I think I worked in Europe when I was living there until I moved back to the States about eight years ago. While I was in Europe, I was very much part of the B Corp movement, which is one which essentially recognizes and nurtures companies which have a triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profit. And part of the problem we had at B Corp was that most kids coming out of business schools had been trained in ways that essentially were a reflection of old extractive paradigms. How do I go for alpha? How do I maximize profit? How do I de-risk? And all of these questions are in the back of everybody's 99%, whatever, of people in business, especially people who have MBAs, and especially the financial community. And it's incredibly frustrating to me because the moment you're a systems thinker, you start realizing that one is that our tools, we think we're data driven. Yes, we choose what data to calculate. There are things called externalities in economics that people just choose not to look at because,
Right.
what impact is this going to have on air quality and water quality, on the health of the people I work with, that kind of question. So, in dealing with business, I still have this problem nearly daily, which is to find that there is much more an extractive mindset, like, I think the mantra in New York, and I have a much more vulgar version of what I'm going to say now, is, what can you do for me in the next five? You have 3 minutes to tell me what you can do for me, right? I would like to hear, what can we do together? How can we collaborate? How can we create something which is good for all? And why not make money doing it? There's no reason why I shouldn't make money. Actually, if it doesn't, it's probably not very sustainable and will create all kinds of problems for everybody involved. So that, there are few companies which have embraced this collaborative thinking, and some even radical collaboration, and Patagonia comes to mind as being iconic in that world. But Europe and worldwide are now the 6,000 companies who've kind of moved to this place. And then there are the companies who realize that they need to show a green face, so they do what's called greenwashing, and look at how wonderful we are. This is what we're doing. And I spent quite a bit of time, especially in Europe, working with companies like L'Oreal and Procter and others to help them. In some cases, they're well-meaning. Mostly, they're kind of cynically manipulative. So help them move beyond the greenwashing to real change, right? But I would say that there is a large chunk of companies that have say this is a problem, our customers don't like it, they want us to do better, and let's talk and let's communicate around this aspect. And you see that, even all companies fit in that category. And, I will be upfront and tell you that a lot of the money we use for developmental work in the poorest places in the world came from oil and gas and mining, which are companies which have these kind of problems. And so thank God they had some money for corporate social responsibility. At least we could use that money to do something good. And then there's the last, category we have just mentioned it without mentioning names of just companies that don't care. They're into making money. They're into fulfilling the shareholders' ambitions of greed, and ultimately really don't care. So, I would, if somebody's looking at potential partnership, I'd say, look at B Corp world, 6,000, some of the big companies like Unilever and Danone, big French-based food company, and look for alliances whenever possible, both individually and corporatively, because it's very hard to do change on your own. You really need to create an ecosystem which will support your vision by aligning with similar visions of other people or other companies.
Absolutely. More of a collective effort is going to be
Yeah,
more
and you
successful.
know, and there's been when I lived here in the late 70s and 80s, I was part of something called uh, SVN Social Venture Network, which was an early, and Jerry were part of it. You
Hmm.
know, the Body Shop was part of it, and which was an early example of how to use business to bring about social and environmental change.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, looking at some of your inner work and future vision, when you look at um, kind of worked in the ancient wisdom realm with just the work over your time, what ancient wisdom do you feel that the modern regenerative movement and community most urgently needs to remember? Like talking about some of those lessons from the natives, like what can they teach us? What are some things that we should be pulling from them?
I think the main lesson that we can learn from really all native people is the experience they have of the pervasiveness of spirit. And what I mean by that is the fact that shaman, well, I'll give you an example. I mean, at some point, DR asked us to find a natural product that we're working in Gabon at the time, a natural product that would help clarify those black spots on one's hand or body, you know, melanin spots, right? And so they're looking for something different or something new and something natural. And we were working in the bee forest, which is a very unique place in the world, and where you have to work with cotton wool in your ears because the
Yeah.
bees will go inside your ears. Uh, but so we asked the shaman to help us find something that would work. And he took what somebody called Terence McKenna would have called heroic dosages of a plant called iboga and walked into the forest and came out with a resin 2 days later. And he said, "This is for you." And we sent it to Dior and they said, "This is wonderful. It really works, you know?" And so we set up a little business. We didn't make any money on this, obviously, but we organized a local cooperative to collect this resin, sell it to Dior, and Dior paid them. So when you ask for Charmin, well, how did you find this? And he said, well, you know, I talked to the captain of the forest. And I said, what does that mean? Well, you know, each tree, each plant, each insect, each bird has a voice. And if
Hmm.
you are in the right place, you can hear that voice and you can talk to it. And so I asked, you know, I don't understand why you were looking for this. It's like of all the problems of the world, this doesn't seem to be a high priority. Nevertheless, you know, I said, what could work? You know, I had these strange people from Europe
Yeah,
asking this question, what could work? And the captain said, go use the resin of this tree.
yeah.
So that is an example of what happens when our relationship with nature and animals changes. And it's happening more and more and more. We're starting to understand that we are not the absolute pinnacle of intelligence and
Hmm.
consciousness on this planet. And that actually we're surrounded by intelligence, and that there is a language and communication that we just have not been aware of. But even today, we know, for instance, that insects will hear the songs of plants. And if a plant is distressed, they will probably go to that plant and attack that plant because it'll be easier to deal with a distressed plant. And that's, you know, at the level, it's not metaphysical. I mean, this is
Hmm.
real science, right? But beyond that, we can move into a place of spirit, and that is that there is the consciousness is pervasive and primal, and that everything reflects what, for lack of a better word, we'll call spirit, including, you know, a mountain, a lake, a river, and
Hmm.
And that the moment you shift your consciousness to realize that this interconnectedness is at the root of all wisdom and of all techniques which help us live in harmony on this planet, that essentially denies a lot of the old paradigm and the alienation that emerges, both, I would say, personal and collective alienation that emerges from that system, that thinking system that sees everything as separate. We on top of the pyramid, given some God right to exploit every other life form on this planet. And what we're witnessing today is a collapse, the total collapse of that kind of thinking paradigm. And even if most of us are in denial about it, and understandably so, I guess. Um, the reality of it is, well, there's an African proverb that says, the man who defecates on the side of a path will find flies upon his return. Huh? I think we're in the time of flies, you know.
Yeah. Dealing with a lot of flies. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. That was really great. And I think there's a lot of synchronicity with that and sustainability, obviously, and just how we're working within our natural environment.
Yeah, I respect, I surround myself with engineers and super
Yeah.
smart scientists and people
Yeah.
who are skilled and specialized. But, and totally respect that choice, but it has to be seen inside a larger systemic kind of thinking.
Yeah.
I met Bucky Fuller when I was 19 in London, and that another person changed my life because
Yeah.
he taught me about that everything exists in relationship with other life systems, right?
Mm,
Kind of systemic thinking.
absolutely. So, if you could wave a magic wand, what challenge or obstacle or situation would you fix within your industry?
First of all, what we're doing is going to impact a lot of different industries. So,
Mm,
and we have the luck and have made choices that allow industries to evolve and change and improve with minimal risk and without having to change production processes and so on, which they don't like to do. Nobody likes risk, especially in business. So we can substitute existing, let's say, toxic products with a bio-based product. What I would say is, even in the case of companies dealing with products like ours, which essentially are thought of in terms of de-risking their investments,
mhm.
they have to take risks. I think it was, I don't remember who said it, but right now, but somebody said, we're going to go extinct as a species because it wasn't cost effective to keep us alive, you know. And that's the problem with that kind of small thinking is, yeah, I'll kick the can down the road, I'll leave that to the next CEO. I will, you know, leading change is always dangerous. That kind of, we need people, let me say it, we need business with balls.
Yeah.
We need, we need people who stand up
Hmm.
and take responsibility for their company and their products and and not take the easy route. And what we're seeing today especially is unfortunately companies going exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah.
I'd love to see more cojones on the part of business.
Yeah.
And in that sense, that's the risk taking which I encourage. I would encourage them to do. And, you know, there are a number of people who've done it in their industries and have become legendaries. Other people
Hmm.
have managed to just kind of evolve, slowly evolve the processes and products that they have in some kind of incremental, at best, incremental way. And it's not enough. Sorry, it's just
Yeah,
not enough. We are at a point in our world where we are dying personally and collectively because of your bad choices.
right. Yeah.
And you know you're doing it. You know you're doing a bad choice. You've known it since the 70s.
Yeah.
Climate change or climate crisis. Well, it used to be climate change. Now it's a climate crisis. You know, we knew we were going this direction. I think we passed 5 of 7 tipping points. It's absurd the situation we're in, and to pretend that we can continue business as usual or
Yeah.
actually fight against positive change.
Change. Yeah. That's pretty ridiculous, huh?
So I think, let women into the boardrooms. That's a good start. You know, they're used to thinking not only of themselves, but of the children and family.
Yeah.
And allow different thinking.
Yeah.
Nurture it.
I agree. I'm glad saying having more women in the boardroom, having more women just involved in the pertinent conversations, I think would be helpful. So
Yeah.
Brando, where can people contact you? Do you have some call to action that you want to share with our audience? Is there any resources, people or services that you're in need of, or just how can people get in touch with you if they want to get more information or
Well,
want
I
to get
think the
involved?
easiest way is probably through LinkedIn, which is,
Okay.
the traditional
Yes.
business platform. I love collaboration. I am not as active on the nonprofit section. We've closed our office in Paris as Prematura, so we now run that foundation out of Brazil. So we're back to our origins, but that's 40 years later. So, yeah, I mean, especially if you're committed to decarbonizing the world,
Mhm.
happy to talk to you.
Okay. Yeah. So
And,
LinkedIn is the best.
and help if I can.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah. The more voices,
We're
the
all
more
in this
hands
boat together.
together. Yeah, exactly. The more voices, the more people working on it together, right?
Yeah, and years ago I went to Burning Man and learned something about radical collaboration, and I still think, wow, why can't we bring that kind of spirit to business?
Right. That's awesome. Maybe we should. Well, Brando, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all the wisdom that you've shared with us, ideas that you've, shared, and it's definitely gotten my brain working in different ways. So thank you. I appreciate the conversation.
What I will leave you with is that,
Yes.
as usual in life, there's no magic solution to all problems, right? Biochar and biocarbons are an important solution, and one which isn't yet understood, but it has a global footprint and it potentially can be very profitable. But it has to be done right. Well, I would especially be interested in talking with people who want to produce biochar or biocarbons because I have spent a lot of time looking at different technologies, looking at different approaches, and have learned that there are lots of problems which are intrinsic to this industry and to these technologies. So I've learned it the tough way, by
Yeah.
essentially banging against the wall with my head every time. So if I can help people not do that, or can share my learning curve in whatever appropriate manner, we can do that, I'm in.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Brando. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.